Are you live?
No, I said, are you?
Oh, why do I have to be live? Yes.
Stream wise ass.
Yes.
I just want to check to see if I'm auto hosting, which apparently I'm not. Why?
It's a 20-second delay or 10-second delay. Give it a second and it'll pick up. My frames are looking good. My new tower comes in. This it's being stress tested and overclocked and everything. He's been sending me, the builder's been sending me images.
Yeah, it looks nice. What'd you get? The 2060? Looks like.
It is the RTX 2060.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. A buddy of mine's like, should have got the 2070. I'm like, that means what?
I had the 70. It's a little barely faster. How's that?
10 digits faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also comes with like twice the price tag.
$400. Yeah,
Well,
about $400 more too.
he's like, oh, you should have got that. I'm like, why? Do you realize this one piece is $400, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
I
and
think
that's
that's
good
enough.
price on those. Because the 70 I got's like, yeah, it's like 7 something.
Yeah.
Half the price of the entire PC. Basically.
Mine
Ridiculous.
was a touch under, but yeah, we could talk about nerd computer stuff later that I can barely comprehend and keep up with myself. But I want to thank you both so much for coming on again, helping continue this, the Let's Talk streams. I really look forward to these. And the last one we were talking about, it was just so great seeing how much passion everybody had for the conversations. And I got a lot out of that last episode. And this one, late last week, somebody that will be joining us from the community has experience with ADHD. He wanted to come on and share his experiences with it. And this week we all agreed on, I pitched it and we all agreed on talking about ADHD. And I saw everybody in the mental health channel got kind of really excited about it because of just the amount of misdiagnosed people out there, that people think that they have ADHD. And I really want to open this topic up a little bit because I don't think I personally fully understand ADHD. Bailey, what do you experience? I'm trying to word it right, but what's your experience in your career with ADHD? Do you encounter a percentage of people that might be in that category?
Yeah, and I think the thing I encounter the most is people who are late in getting diagnosed. So I work with the adult population, and I see people who are looking back and thinking, 30 years ago, we didn't know what this was. We didn't know that I didn't process things differently. I wish I had that time back is a really common statement because a lot of the symptoms of ADHD can mirror other things. People are very hard on themselves. They're very judgmental to themselves. Their negative self-talk is very real. And so it can mimic anxiety, depression, all of these things that we think of in adults before we think of ADHD. I know that one of the most common symptoms of depression in working adults is the inability to pay attention. And so if you're looking for symptoms for something that you've heard of, if you're looking for something that you have in common with other people, people are going to cite that probably before they think that an adult has ADHD when that's a kid disease. That's just, you can't pay attention very well, right?
Right. And I see some of the facts that I pulled up, and the average age of being diagnosed is around 7 years old.
Yeah. I mean, I was that kid that we didn't know why I stood up in class, but I did. And I look back, and it was just all of second grade, just stood up to learn. Um, but it was those things, and especially females have not been diagnosed, traditionally at least. And we think that maybe this is beginning to add to this imposter syndrome of people thinking that they can't handle things they really can. It's another one of those issues where mental illness lies to you.
Right. And it, like you said earlier, ADHD can doesn't increase a person's risk for other conditions or diseases, but could coexist with other conditions, like you said, depression, anxiety is one, learning abilities.
Absolutely.
Really, in my
Really,
mind,
any
I
of
see
them.
like bipolar could be a factor
Yes.
as well because of the mood swings that come from being affected by ADHD.
Yes.
Because
And
there's those
then,
highs and lows. Sorry.
oh, such high. No, absolutely. And you're right. And sometimes the highs can look like someone who's very focused. And I think one of the myths about ADHD is that people can't focus. They
Right.
really can. They hyper focus on one thing. So the whole, squirrel thing that we joke about is very real because we're going to focus on what we need to attend to right then, or rather, what our brain thinks we do. Usually, it's not what we actually want to. So then, when you look back at, depression, well, if you can't focus to get your work done, you're going to be depressed. You're going to be anxious.
Yeah. And have a lot of impulse, like acting out and this. I think I have a misconception of ADHD with the acting out and the impulse from it. I know we can't. It's hard not to label anybody or diagnose somebody with something. I see people every day. I interact with people all over, and people will jump the gun to quickly say that person must have ADHD, or or they'll treat it almost as like a negative label on somebody, and that could be just. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, which is kind of a little bit of my problem with the whole thing. So, my story is Christopher was diagnosed with it prior to when he was still living with his mother, and he was in a different school system.
Right, and Chris is your son.
Yep, Christopher, little Christopher. Which I didn't necessarily agree with, but I wasn't there the full time at that point. So, they kind of do this they diagnose them with just a simple, what is it? I think it's called the Connors test.
Mm-hmm.
That rings a bell, Bailey.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of a general test. So, unfortunately for Chris, he got diagnosed with that, gets put on Ritalin and all this stuff. Well, come to find out, when he moved in with me, I dug a little bit deeper into it, and the reality was he didn't actually have it. He had severe anxiety, depression, but OCD. And it was the OCD that was tricking them.
Really?
So they're thinking, oh, he has ADHD. Really, he had OCD. So because he's getting stuck in that loop and going around in circles, that's their automatic response, So, and it was kind of up to us to get to the bottom of it.
They're kind of related. If you look at the history of development of those and the intrusive thoughts that really come with it, they do kind of go hand in hand. And I've heard of that with other people as well. So it's unfortunate, but it's interesting to hear that. You figured it out.
They're very similar in the way of people see it, and I think even the way it tests. The problem is the medications for it are on two completely different ends of the spectrum. So by him being on the Ritalin, which was really the exact opposite of what he needs,
Yeah.
actually probably played a major part into his anxiety and depression kind of coming up to the next level, because he's taken on the chemicals that he didn't actually need at the time. So it's unfortunate for
Absolutely.
him, but you know.
I've seen, that I can't imagine taking Ritalin, and I know people do, recreationally, but really you're taking speed. It's speed.
Yeah. Yep.
And if you don't need it, when you do need it, I got to tell you, it works really well and it
Oh
doesn't feel
yeah.
speedy. But
Yep.
if you don't need it, how could you not be anxious?
Oh yeah.
Especially if you didn't know what's going on.
Yeah. It's like ripping a line. If you don't need Ritalin, and yeah, it'll keep you up all night. You'll have a hell of a conversation with whoever you're with. So but but now he's on the Prozac, which is very good for the OCD. So that's really helping him, kind of break that cycle he's in. So
Right.
but,
Well, also with us, joining us with our Let's Talk stream is a pinnacle member of our community, Mr. Buchanan. He's friends of so many. He's everywhere, and he pointed out to me today that I sadly was not following him on my socials. And you know why? Because he's so everywhere. He pops up on my feeds every day. I had no idea I wasn't following him. But nonetheless, we corrected that very quickly. But Mr. Boop, I'm going to find it really hard calling you Mr. Boop this entire time. What's your first name?
Oh.
Oh, now we're getting close.
Oh, there we go.
I really thought he just said his name was Boop. And I was like, this is fantastic. This made the show right there.
His name is, in fact, Mr. Boop.
No.
I go by Boop now, yes.
Boop. What's your first name?
Sean.
Sean. All right. Sean, I told at the beginning that you and I talked late last week, and you brought up that you had some experiences with ADHD, and if we ever had as a topic, you'd love to come on and share it and this and that. And I thought it was a great opportunity to touch on something that you don't really hear too often. So I'm glad that you were able to come on and talk to us with it and talk to us about it.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I really do appreciate it. It's been something I've been very passionate about for many years, especially since I've been able to understand it, get more control.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, as you mentioned before, it is highly misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed in a lot of cases. And I think because there's so many different types of it, it's difficult to assess. But I mean, it's the only way I can explain it is it's almost like those of us that do deal with it. It's almost like we know each other to some degree. Because I'm in a position now where I have to do a lot of training, and I can recognize it.
Really?
In some of the associates I work with, some of the associates I have to train, and it becomes a different conversation because I have to tailor an approach, and I even had a conversation with one of my associates the other day, and I said he got to the right person because now I understand you and how you process. So if I were to take it back when you mentioned it's difficult to understand, they call it neurotypical. So those that are neurotypical, and it's very hard to comprehend what we see, what we experience. So the best way to explain it, and the best way that I've read it, is that if you're watching 100 televisions at one time, you're trying to comprehend everything that's happening at one time, and it makes it makes the world around you very loud, especially when you're trying to process a lot. So a lot of people
Keep me posted. Send me a message.
Undiagnosed, not understanding themselves or what it means, they find it difficult to process. So you experience the anxieties, you experience the depressions, because you don't know which way to go. One of the most common things that those of us with ADHD are labeled as lazy. And the best way I can explain it is there are many days, especially in my single years, when I'd have a day off and I know that I've got 20 things I need to do. So I have to analyze, what am I going to do? I wake up in the morning, okay, I've got to go to the store. I've got to write this paper, or I've got to look at my mail. I've got to pay this bill. I've got to do this. And, I want to go walk my dog. I want to play a game. You go through so much to try to plan it. And at that point, you've gone through so much decision making, you've worn yourself out. And when you do that, that comes across as lazy because it's over processing. And it's very hard to recognize, because I know so many of my earlier years I missed out in understanding it, because I've known I've had it all my life.
I think people kind of get stuck there in that planning process where they're focused on the planning too, and they can't move past it.
Yes, because the planning is so hard, because you don't know how to prioritize, because you analyze each situation. But the one thing that I've found as I've gotten older, because there's a lot to my story, but it finally took a pivotal moment in my life to say, okay, once, with failed relationships and trouble, like things that I've dealt with at work, I started understanding there was common denominators, even though I've known my ADHD, and I came across the clarity through a happy accident. So I went to go, because I went back to my doctor after a couple of years, because I'd moved away. And then when I came back, I went back to the same doctor to say, hey, I need to, come visit for my medication. I want to talk to you about that. And so the lady at the front desk had said, oh, well, now what we're doing is that we are, with all of our patients, they have to go get assessed. I'm like, look, I've been assessed 14 times in my life. What do I need to bring you? And she says, well, we need the documentation if we don't have the paperwork. Okay. So I follow the bouncing ball. I find a doctor that wasn't too far from me. And $150 later, I go in, I talk to him, and it took 5 minutes in the conversation. He goes, oh yeah, you got ADHD. It didn't take very long. But then he wanted to do the assessment and it was a pretty detailed assessment. And I think he mentioned the name, which I'd forgotten about. But when I did it, it was actually again, like I said, the happiest accident I've ever had, because it detailed more than I've ever seen how I learn. And I'd never seen that on paper. And as I started reading through it, it really hit me. And then I started reading more about it. I started digging deeper. I started finding more articles. I started finding sources, and even going into Barnes and Noble and looking through books and just reading it, capturing my attention, hyper focusing, if you will, to get that understanding. And as I started learning, and I started understanding that everybody has different triggers, and as I learned my triggers, helped me be what I think is the most important behavior of anything you deal with is mindfulness. And when you can get to the point where you know yourself so well that I know when my triggers are going to happen, I either one of two things. I either back myself out of the situation, or I mentally prepare myself to say, this is what's going to happen. This, you know how you're going to react. Don't do that, Sean. Don't do it. And even though it's still a struggle every day, that with the processing, it, for where I am now, I feel like I've turned what's been a crutch, an excuse, into what I feel is a superpower to me. because I would never give my ADHD back for 1 minute. To me, because learning how to understand it, I've even questioned whether I still have it in me. But then I have my moments. And I go, yep, I'm still there. But the powers of perception that people with ADHD have, you can, depending on how you learn, for me, I can see a visual problem and I can find 10 solutions immediately. If you tell me a problem, it might take me a little bit longer. If I got to read the problem, well, it might even be longer. So, but for me, it's a matter of when you see people, you see so much more. And and people with ADHD have an innate ability to read people very well. It's very hard to get something over on us because we see the inflections that other people don't. And I'm not saying that there aren't perceptive people out there. Don't take me the wrong way. It's just it becomes an innate ability to be able to read people very well, and understand situations around you. It's when you start getting into overprocessing that you get into analysis paralysis, essentially, and that's where the struggles happen, and that's where your projects are going to be scattered. But it's organized chaos, and if it's like having everything in front of you visually. It may appear to be disorganized, but it's organized in my head because it could be one of those things where it's out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And but I know it's there. I know what my uses for whatever it may be are. So it's just when it comes down to it, the people that struggle, if they learn the mindfulness and to understand themselves and what their triggers are, and that goes, I would think, in what you talk about with everything regarding mental health issues. It's knowing your triggers. And when you know your triggers, you know what to avoid and how to move forward. And that's just how I've been able, like I said, my story goes so much deeper in what I've dealt with. But,
well, as somebody that's, that you were formally diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
When were you first diagnosed, and when did it first become evident that you might be affected by a learning disorder, or a hyperactive disorder like ADHD? Were you still in grade school, or was it later?
If not before
really?
That.
Wow.
It was very early. I'm a lot older than I look, but when I first was diagnosed with it is when they were really starting to put the diagnosis out there, and I became that Ritalin kid. They felt it. The cure was when you hit puberty that your hormones are going to balance out, and it was further from it. That was further than from the truth. But I was diagnosed very early on and put on Ritalin, and I did relatively well in school. I had all the typical ADHD symptoms. But as I got older, got to 14 years old, I'll never forget when I was taken off the medication. I remember all of a sudden I found my appetite. And it was like a whole different change. But those years I struggled throughout high school. I was an average student. I was never an A student, but I still held a lot of the symptoms, and I wish I'd have been able to understand it more then. But everybody felt that it was just one of those things. You come off of it, the hormones take over, and it wasn't until after I graduated that I realized that I'm still dealing with it. I was in a job where I felt like I couldn't get anywhere. I felt like, why don't I have the motivation? Why don't I have the drive? I couldn't figure it out. And my mom had read this article and very simply stated that when if you were to meet 3 of these symptoms, you should go get checked for adult ADHD. And I hit 9 out of 10. And it was at that point that my mom actually got me an appointment back with the original neurologist that diagnosed me when I was a kid. and and they diagnosed me when I was a kid, and at that point they started trying different medications. Where my struggle was is that I didn't want to rely on it as a crutch. I always thought I could tell myself, you can do this on your own. You can do this on your own. You don't need it. And it's not that there aren't ways to do it, but I just didn't do it. So I continued to struggle. I continued to try different things, and then I went to go get reassessed again through a different doctor, through another conversation that I had with somebody. And then he put me on Adderall. And he told me at the time that I had ADHD and mild anxiety. Well, I felt, well, if I tackle the ADHD, that'll probably fix the anxiety part, because I think that they were one and the same. I felt that early on. And then, but he told me, you take this like aspirin, and you if you have a headache, you take an aspirin. If you need to focus, you take the Adderall. So I'm taking the Adderall when I need to focus. Well, it was at different times of the day, and at that point, I don't think there was a whole lot of knowledge around it to know that it needs to be something that's got to be constant. Well, it affected my moods. That has a huge crash. I didn't recognize what was happening to me. One failed relationship later, it finally took for me to understand that I could go back to the cause. So again, I was back to square one. And again, it was just a number of years where I said, I'm going to fix this myself. I can do this. I can do this. And it was just, again, living an average life until the scenario that I explained to you earlier, when I finally had the light bulb moment to understand this is the avenue I got to go down. So it's just been years of self-diagnosis, of misdiagnosis, of too many hands in the cookie jar, essentially, of trying to say, this is what's going to work for you, but let's try this. And then finally landed on the right person. And it didn't happen to be, interestingly enough, it did not happen to be a therapist. It did not happen to be, it was my actual general practitioner. And I owe a big debt to this guy, because he was the one who said, let's try it this way. Okay, let's formulate it this way. Let's try this dose. Let's try with this. Let's move to that. How do you feel? And he stayed with me through the whole way to get me to the point where I am where I am now. And, it just takes that one right person that gets to learn you. And it's a journey. It's not an easy one. And again, it's a struggle that I know a lot of people face. And that's where I've had so many conversations now that I can recognize them, and I can guide the associates and my team of associates through their training, and say, here's some outside sources for you to look at, to understand, to read, and who to go talk to, and what kind of conversations to have.
Well, that's great that you were able to take everything that you've learned and all the knowledge you've gained to personally help you personally, succeed going through life and in what you're doing, that you're able to pay it forward to people that might not have ADHD or ADD, but you're able to break down a learning process for them that they can understand it better.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because I think back to the example of, I had it was one of my associates. I could recognize it early on, and he struggled so hard with it was more in his temperament than anything, where I recognized it. And I had to sit him down, because again, in professional corporate environment, you have to be careful what you ask and what, and it was the simple question I asked him is like, how do you learn? Talk to me about how you learn things. Is it writing things down? Is it verbal? How is it? And then he started talking to me, and then I said, have you ever had conversations with somebody about it? And then we got around to the point where about the actual conversation of ADHD. And and I felt like I helped Tim. When I say I helped him understand that as an adult, don't be embarrassed, embrace it, because it's who you are. It's not like you can change it. So how do you make it work for you? And eventually he turned. I feel it's a success story because it's something I can speak on where I was able to help somebody turn themselves around to where they were able to become successful in that field. And, and now I'm at a whole different location and a whole different set of people, and I'm recognizing it again. And it feels good because I can share my struggle. And this is at this point in my life, I feel like I owe it to be able to do that now, and not just have a personal success story, but to, again, like you mentioned, pay it forward, and just share that. I think a lot of people have that capability to be able to find that path and that light at the end of the tunnel. It's never something that's going to go away. It's never something that's going to go away. But how have I made it work for me? And how have I curbed a lot of the behaviors that become that I guess that spawn from it? If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely does. Yeah, it's great to hear, like, I'd hate to say a success story of it, because I know so many people in the world struggle with it their entire lives. And even if they were misdiagnosed as something else earlier on and had interventions and medicines that were counteractive to actually helping them, you were able to take charge and used it as almost like a springboard to learn as much as you possibly could about it, and you took the initiative, which is absolutely fantastic to hear. And you've overachieved. I mean, it's great to hear experiences like that in anything. I am still trying to unpack as much about this as possible, because there's a lot of facts on it that I never knew were actually there. Alex, how you doing? Is he awake?
He's on mute.
And no longer on mute. Hey, what's going on?
Good.
Going on?
Nothing.
Yeah, no,
nothing.
I caught the tail end of that boop, and that is awesome that you found a way to manage it head on.
I have to say it took it took well over half my life to finally start sorting it out. But it was just really like so many years that I didn't understand why I did the things that I did. And I was in where the story gets really powerful for me and really hits home was that in my relationship with my dad, I've always had a wonderful relationship with my dad. But for some reason, he always felt like after my mom passed that we always seemed to fight, and I just felt like that was just normal father-son thing where they would just bicker, But I realized how I was reacting to him, and at one point he called me an island amongst myself, and I started thinking really hard about that, and when I started realizing what. In reading the articles that I felt could best explain it, I found one article and I had him read it. I just sent it to him, and he called me, and it was a different inflection in his voice, and I could tell it, like he would tell it, he was just visibly upset, and he said, "I never knew." He said, "I never knew what goes on inside your brain, and what it is that you're picking up on, because there's so many, again, like it was just one of those real moments for me where it was like, and our relationship had been even better. Did I say different? Because I reacted differently to him, he reacted differently to me, and he understood. And it only took in the 40s for my dad to realize that, but it's never too late.
Well, to kind of pivot, like when you started that off, you said that it was kind of something you never like knew a lot about. Now, Bailey, wouldn't you agree that's kind of like a recurring theme when people finally start to address their mental health?
Absolutely. The way that we adapt to whatever's going on, you probably found ways that you didn't even know you were doing to handle what was going on in your mind. And we just get used to whatever's going on. We build ways to deal with it, and we keep going to where that's the normal. So it's very freeing. It's very enlightening when someone is able to say, that's not normal. Not everybody thinks like that. And I didn't know that was wrong.
That's true.
I mean, if you can think about, I never knew people thought about what they said later when they went home. Like, does not everybody lay in bed thinking about what they've said to everyone else in the world all day? Probably not. But I thought they did. So when somebody told me that wasn't exactly the case, it was very interesting, because if you've been dealing with something since you were a child, that's just life to you. People who have been colorblind all their lives don't miss color.
Right. No, that makes sense. It's, I'd always known I'd been different, but it was, and I looked at it, and I never always told myself I don't want to use it as a crutch. I don't want to use it as a crutch. It's an excuse, or not use an excuse, or use it as a crutch. It's just an explanation of who I am. But without the learnings and the understanding, again, it comes down to those trigger things that I explained before. I always try to figure out why do I have these troubles, and why do I have the same issues and the same troubles at work? Why do I seem like to have difficulty in people taking me seriously or understanding? And for me, I found it was in my active listening. It's because for instance, like when I was explaining earlier about somebody telling me a problem and I see the visual problem, well, I was shooting holes in it immediately. Well, because I was shooting holes in that immediately, I wasn't getting the I guess the buy-in from my peers, as I was just being somebody that was just being ugly or destructive with feedback or with somebody else's ideas. But I thought I was just doing the right thing and saying, well, here's what I see. So I had to learn to relax, to take a minute and take a step back and let people do their thing, even though I know I was right, but it wasn't like an I told you so scenario. But it was those kind of behaviors, just the small changes, that were very hard to do. But just like practice with anything else, it became easier. And when I saw the changes and how people reacted to me differently, it became easier to start exhibiting those behaviors that I didn't think I could control before.
Now, like what kind of practice did you do for that? Was that just like as the events arose kind of situation, or like did you actively like do something on a daily basis to like help yourself?
No, it wasn't that. It was just because I never knew when a scenario like that was gonna hit. But It was just asking for feedback, because I had told my boss, I said, look, here's one thing I need you to understand about me. This is how I learn. When you recognize these things, call me out on it. And he did. He was on my side. He was very much in tune, because he would stop me when I would start going off on a tangent. He would reel me back in. But when he would do that, it helped me recognize when I was doing it. So as I started doing that was my practice, because it was having an accountability partner, which happened to be my boss. It happened to be some of my peers, because I had a tendency to talk in circles, which I could have been doing tonight. But it was somebody calling me out and telling me, this is what you're doing. And as other people recognized it and let me see it, then that was the practice. Does that make sense?
Does.
But I knew for me, if it was one of those things, I know that a lot of things can begin with ADHD. So when I mentioned about the anxiety part of it, that's where, if I could get my ADHD under control, I could get my anxiety, or at least I'd be able to say, where does it separate?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it separate? Where okay, now that I got this under control, what are my other triggers to any anxiety issue? But most of it I found tied together for me, and that if I could get one thing under control and change my mindset on the fly, more so than I ever was able to do before, or even recognized, or even tried to do, or cared to do, that people's reaction made all the difference in the world to me. Because when people reacted differently to me, took me more seriously, I realized I was on the right track, and that whatever I was practicing or whatever I was asking of people was working. So it was a constant process. So, even with my fiance, she decided, I'm going to read a book about it. I was like, okay, what did you learn? And some of what she learned is how to recognize it in me and call me out on it whenever it's happening. But that's a fine line too, because that's one of the derailers of ADHD, is that when you call somebody out on it, they can get hypersensitive. And because they feel so much, sensitivity levels are so high, that there you try to organize feelings. And because you're feeling so much at one time, it's hard to disseminate which way you're supposed to go, which feeling you're supposed to latch on to. So it's always going to be a delicate balance, because all of the, I guess, stimulus out there, that's the word I'm looking for, all the things that stimulate you can come at you at 100 miles an hour. And I mean, even more so than a lot of people recognize, because it can come at you really fast. It can be really overwhelming. Can be very, very overwhelming.
Now that could also play into being misdiagnosed away from ADHD with somebody that
Correct.
doesn't recognize their triggers and is going into situations and getting a massive amount of anxiety from it.
One of the things...
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
One of the things I think is really interesting that you mentioned is this perception from other people, because something that people with anxiety and with ADHD have in common is a superpower. It really is, about how we recognize the feedback off of people's faces. We can read it quicker than other people. And so when we're looking for something, you can usually see what you want to see. If I'm looking for judgment from somebody else, I can probably find it. If I can, if we have been, if I think I've disappointed somebody, I can probably find disappointment in their face. And so while it's very useful in some situations and it helps us to read people, in some situations it's not reliable. And we tend to focus on that feedback and the negative feedback excluding the positive things that come from whatever we're dealing with.
No, you're right. I mean, it's very easy to, when you're reading somebody's face, and I've already figured out 100 different ways I've already disappointed that person, and therefore one thing that I learned early on, that sometimes your greatest opportunity is your strength over amplified. And that's what I had found with that, was I was always an overanalyzer, a classic overanalyzer. And God, I wore people out just trying to get to the bottom of whatever it is that they're feeling. And I always had to get a temperature read, because I was always like, okay, am I right or wrong? I was always trying to prove myself either right or wrong. That to say that, oh, I knew it. I knew you were feeling that way. Well, when I probably thought 40 different things, they could have, any one of them could have been, but, that's the other part that was hard to overcome, is the overanalysis. But when you use the overanalysis in a scenario like what I have to do for a living, or if I were a detective, because I'll tell you what, I've crusaded so many things at work that require a hyper focus on analyzing something and information and disseminating that information. And I feel like like the beautiful mind thing. Like all of a sudden, I feel like I'm there comes my superpower, because I'm using my overanalysis in the right way. I'm using constructively instead of destructively. And when you find that outlet for your strengths, that it's a great feeling. But boy, when you flip that switch and you try to figure out what people are thinking, I think the one part of my story that I miss is that it got to the point where I wore my heart on my sleeve so much that there was a scenario of somebody that I met that blatantly said that they basically used me, used my good nature. It was a blatant statement saying that they used. And somehow my feelings went from heart on the sleeve to like, I feel absolutely nothing. Like I went completely numb. I didn't think I could ever reach that stage. But when I say it was like a dark place, it was a place that I had a lot of void and feelings. Like I moved through life for a while, not analyzing anything. It was a strange contradiction to the way my brain worked at the time. And I had no feeling. I called it as I see it. I've always been honest and transparent, but I was more blatantly so. I mean, not mean, but very blatant. I'm going to tell you what I think. And for me, that was probably the best thing to happen to me, because I didn't spiral so far out of my feelings, because I have a son, and he was my anchor. And to say that I can never reach any kind of rock bottom, because I have to live. I've got to. So when I came out of it and started coming back into my senses, and it helped me find the balance that I knew that I was able to I don't have to live so far with my heart on my sleeve or being completely devoid of feeling, but it helped me find that balance to then be able to see the world and perceive it more objectively, and then use my ADHD in the right way. And then that's when I felt like I really had to start paying it forward. But everybody has to have that light bulb moment. Everybody's got to find it. And I was blessed that I found mine.
So for you, like, what's the biggest takeaway that you can give to people who on like managing their ADD or their ADHD? What if you met someone that suffers from it, and they want to address it, like what's the number 1 or 2 or 3 tips you would talk to them about?
First, it's get educated. I mean, number 1, you have to. The rule to anything is to understand what you're looking at. Get educated, and then have accountability partner, whether it be person you're in a relationship with, a doctor, a therapist. My case, it was a mixture of all of that. But you have to realize be able to leave your feelings on the table and accept that feedback. And then the last part of it is to really dig deep and be mindful. Mindfulness is for me was one of the biggest, can't say cures, but one of the biggest things that helped me overcome it, because I learned myself, and putting all that together, I know my triggers, and even with that, it allowed me to be a lot more objective. So really, it's just about get educated, have accountability partner, be accountable to yourself, and know yourself. Find your triggers so you can avoid them or overcome them.
Fantastic.
That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great advice right there. Some people might not know what to look for. Like you were saying earlier that you help associates at work learn their jobs better, and you're able to reach them on a level that they can understand what they should be doing or what their role is, in a corporate environment. I just wanted to, I pulled up something that I found off healthline.com, which is just a few signs that might stand out to maybe recognize it in a setting that you might be in a situation with somebody else, to help them learn something or to try and get through to them a little more. And a few of the signs for a hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is interrupting, trouble waiting for their turn, emotional turmoil, fidgetness, problems playing quietly, unfinished tasks, lack of focus, and self-focused behavior.
You've just described 70% of my adult friendships.
Well, there is a lot of misdiagnosis out there.
I mean,
even
Joe also knows.
And...
Joe also knows all the guys I play video games with.
True, and if you know me, if I see something shiny out the window, I completely lose where I am.
Squirrel.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing too. I mean, I think Bailey said it. A squirrel. Your attention could be pulled away very easily. You're not focused on what you're doing. You're not listening. My 10-year-old came back with this from school, and it's something that she learned at school, that one of her teachers is sharing with the students. And also, I think I heard Elmo say it on Sesame Street, but is listening with your whole body. If somebody's not fully focused on what is in front of them, they're not really listening. But what are some of the signs that I just listed, some of the things that you look for in coworkers and associates that you work with that might trigger you to go, you know what? This person, John, is leaving. He's not finishing his work. He's distracted very easily. He's in the middle of a meeting. He's cutting people off constantly. He's constantly moving, or he's just not grasping. He's just not learning what his tasks are. Are those some of the things that, if you see that you start to develop, what, maybe I need to pull John aside and have a talk with him and maybe try and get through to him?
Oh yeah, you nailed it all right on the head, actually. For me, it's more in a selling environment, so it's interactions with customers. and it was about how more so like with the one associate that I was talking about earlier. It was more about how it was how I was watching how he was retaining his information.
Gotcha.
Because it was about I would tell him something, and then literally it would be like 2 days later, and we would have the same exact conversation. So that's where it really started triggering with me that how is he learning? Because I'd caught him the way he was really just trying to self-teach himself other things like writing things down, but incessantly writing things down. And the disorganized pattern in which he was writing things down. It really clued into me. It's like, absolutely, I know this guy has got to be 150% ADHD.
I think it's so amazing that you can point that out, because if you look at the things that you just named, Joe, they're basically being a jerk. Like, some people with ADHD can be real jerks, and we don't mean to be, but if you're interrupting people all the time, if you are not waiting your turn, usually people at work don't want to deal with that. And so you engaging people in these conversations is huge, because most of the time those people get kicked out of the group. They're ostracized, they're not involved, and they have to leave the workplace. It can be very difficult.
It is. And, I spent so many years distracted in what I was doing. The thing is that on the average, a lot of people with ADHD have above average intelligence. They just don't know how to apply it. And for years, people just kept talking to me about potential that I have, and that they see it, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I don't see it. I don't know. I don't know what the heck you see, really. But thanks. But it was just enough people that just kept saying, well, you got this thing. And it was all the way back from grade school. They were like, oh my God, he makes me so angry, but I just love him. It's been the same common theme throughout most of my childhood and adult life. It was just like, everybody loves me, but God, they couldn't stand me, because I would be either off the wall or I would just be moody, and it was like that what I recognized in that associate about his moodiness. And another thing that it was like, when he would get frustrated, it wasn't losing his mind about like losing his mind angry, but when he got frustrated, he lost all comprehension. So I could talk to him, and I could see he's looking at me, and he's retaining nothing of what I'm telling him. Especially when I'm trying to guide him through, this is what you need to do. And when he got frustrated, he just mentally blocked. It was a complete mental block. So when those situations would arise, my approach would be, okay, you need to slow down. You need to take a walk and take a breath. Come back to it. I mean, that's pretty common for a lot of people, but especially if you got to catch them in that moment to say, okay, whatever hormones are working against you right now, you need to take a minute and recognize it. This is the moment. So being his accountability partner and saying, this is what you're doing it right now. This is exactly what I was telling you about. You're doing it right now. And the more he was able to recognize it, I think it's still something he's going to struggle with until he really gets to the right person, or to find whatever right dosage of medication that he would. And I don't always believe in medication. I only believe in the medication to help you think clearer about how to approach your situation. It's not the cure. It just helps you think clearer. It helps you
focus a little bit. Yeah, lets you
just to organize your thoughts enough. Because my son has it, and I recognize that at 3 years old. And it's the same conversation I have with him. It's just all about saying you are on this medication, but you're only taking it so that you can recognize the behaviors that you have, that you're exhibiting, so that when you're not on the medication, that I've got to, this is the decision I've got to make. It just might be a little bit harder for me to get there. I know it's a pretty adult conversation to have with my 13-year-old son, but it's something I want him to recognize in a way that I didn't have. When it said that it took 40 years for my dad to understand how I was, I can pay that forward to my son, and hopefully he gets ahead of it, and he could be much more prosperous than I was, or am, and have been, it that for me is that now being able to recognize it and see it. I feel like I've done something right. I've done right by him.
That's great. I think you've hit on some great notes, and even just patience, I think, right? So it can be frustrating for everybody on both sides, and that's true with any mental illness, right? Or really anything in life. But being able to recognize triggers and all that, I think that's true across the whole spectrum of whatever you can bring up, right? So it's recognizing those things and teaching yourself how to get around it. It's just something in your way, and learning how to move yourself out of the way, get past it, and then go back on the path, I guess. So which is a conversation I have with my son also. He's 18 now, but I mean we've been doing this for a hardcore 4 years, 5 years, really, and it's all the same stuff. And I don't think they're ever too young to have a conversation like that. I really I don't think I don't think any child is ever too young. You can present it, and you maybe just say it a little slower, but you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and then you have to have faith and patience in them to overcome it also. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, but it certainly has turned me into the daddy bear. Like with my son in school, and recognizing when teachers, we've had them on a 504 plan, so that means all the teachers have to follow this guideline, and
Yep.
and if they veer from it, boy, I'll tell you what, they get my email,
Yep.
but I also have, but on the flip side of that is that he has to understand that he's accountable, that he can never use that as his crutch, that you're on this plan because you learn differently. But if 1 minute you come to me and just tell me, oh, this is because of my ADHD, we're going to have a sterner conversation.
Absolutely. I was gonna ask you about if you guys were doing any different programs. So Christopher's on a 504, but they call it an IEP here also. So he's in a dedicated skills training class, and that skills training class isn't just about his schoolwork. It's about what the title is really, giving him tools to use in everyday life. Part of it is helping him get his work done or coordinating with teachers, and they'll actually go and sit in on his classes at times and that sort of thing, just to observe him. We're very lucky here. So in his school alone, he has a full-time psychiatrist that he can see at any time, 2 social workers, there's 4 guidance counselors there. He has yoga. It's amazing.
Yeah, the amount of resources schools nowadays has versus when we all went to school is 100-fold. I mean,
yeah.
Well, fortunately, we have a former teacher here that can talk all about that, don't we?
Yes, and public education is fantastic. No, I was just thinking that it is so great that you have all of that, because here in Kansas, we're woefully understaffed as far as behavioral health professionals in the schools. We have some great ones. We just don't have enough.
Well,
and I'm not
yeah,
really sure why that is.
we're extremely lucky. I mean, you go 2 towns over and they don't have half of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, which was going to be another part of my, I was going to bring it up, and I've been doing more and more research, because even when he was living with his mother, he's 3 towns away. None of that exists. None of it. There's maybe 2 guidance counselors for the entire school, which actually has more children, because we happen to live in a town that collects a lot of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
They have that, but it's a problem, I think, that needs to be addressed, and it plays a part in all of this, because when you have that, then you have the proper testing, then you have the proper diagnosis, but get that in the schools much earlier. Um, have a psychiatrist available in elementary school. Why not? To me, it's a no-brainer, but that's a whole nother subject. But I just thought it was all interesting kind of facts, and the more I read about it too is with the ADHD, is also senior citizens seem to kind of comes on for them later on in life, or maybe it's recognized more. I don't know if anybody.
Well, I can just say that I know that, in my experience, that growing up, it was expected that it would go away, just as your hormones would hit after puberty, but it can get worse. And again, that's where it's unrecognized, because people that have a hard time holding a job, or have a hard time staying focused and being able to succeed, because they're the only reason that they're a danger unto themselves in that case is because they can't figure out what path to take, and they don't understand how to make the choices they need to make in order to handle stressful situations, depending on what job they're in. And then conversely, the other side, where we talk about interrupting, or the inability to finish a project, or to show up on time, because you got so involved in so many things that got distracted before you went to work, and you end up being late all the time. And there's small behaviors like that. You lose your job for the stupidest things. I've been lucky not to have lost a job, but I do know that you get into that pattern where you're like, you lose your motivation because you don't know how to move forward. And it got so bad for me at one point when before, with my son's mom, when we were together. She had a corporate mind. She had the resume for it, and we both put in for jobs because we were thinking about career change. And she was getting all of these hits for regional director and all higher level management. Well, my low point was when the only thing that came back for me was to be a cashier at Claire's. I was like, "Are you serious?" He was like, "Is this my worth? Is this all I can do? Is this all I seem to be capable of doing?" And somebody says, "All you can do is be a cashier at Claire's." And again, it was just that's where a part of my low point was in my life, for that, to feel like that my self-worth, and I didn't know how to get out of the hole. I didn't know what to do. So I just stayed the course of where I was, and I said, I'm gonna swallow my pride, and I'm gonna try to do the best that I can at what I'm doing, get better at that, and then build a better resume. But it just turned into, luckily I was able to turn that around. But yeah, I mean, it's like those kind of situations. That's why people struggle so much in their adult life, is because they don't recognize that what they're dealing with, and how their thought process is holding them back, rather than being able to catapult them forward.
I think that's something we see a lot too, is just you do see positive outcomes when people figure it out. Once they get diagnosed, once they have started figuring out there are things I need to do, we do see really positive outcomes because it's something
the
that
light bulb goes on, right?
absolutely. And in the workplace, just like in school, if you can communicate to somebody, hey, I just really need you to email me everything because I don't get it when you say it. You can say it, but then you need to email me. That's a really easy accommodation that doesn't always involve, filing for disability or those type of things that we think about with other mental illnesses. There can be some really practical things that we can do that other people can do to make others' lives easier, to make productivity happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the dangers. So you get you misdiagnosed, or it just never occurs to anybody, and then you get frustrated, and then you start to believe the negative things that are happening to you. You take on that reality eventually. You're basically being set up to fail. You're not
Mm-hmm.
being set up to succeed. And if somebody tells you, something enough times, eventually you're just going to throw in the towel and say, okay, that's what I am. When really, you're much, much more than that. And I think that's true with anything, but it's
I got
definitely.
two words that help you overcome a lot. You ready for it? Color
Shoot.
coding.
Yeah.
Color coding.
I'm telling you, it's a godsend. Get you some highlighters and some sticky notes. Boy, I'll tell you, highlighting is seriously the best way I can visually disseminate information. I'll go through a report, and if I know that there's these certain things I've got to look at, and then all of a sudden it just starts forming a pretty picture. But it helped me, but I know color coding, seriously, good Lord, I'm still very disorganized, but when I color code, I'm telling you, it's like it's miracles happen.
So yeah, maybe because you're more visual learner, is that kind of the?
Absolutely,
All right, yeah.
most definitely. I'm absolutely a visual learner.
And so I know there's all different terms for how you learn, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't have the list in front of me. I don't know if anybody knows what those
The
are
different.
called.
The
I know.
learning styles, there's like visual
Yeah,
and spatial, tactile.
yeah, yeah. I know. There's a few of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which again, it brings back another thing. I don't mean to keep bringing up the schools, but a better test than the Connors test would be would be very useful.
Yeah. And I think, we have to start showing a little bit of variability for culture, for just the changing world that our kids live in. It's
Hmm.
it's pretty old and it's standard, but being able to identify those things is huge. How we get it into the
Mm-hmm.
hands of people that need it, so that we don't have, you know, um, adults looking back and thinking these are the things I could have done if I would have learned when I was 13 that color coding works for me.
Right?
You know,
Yeah.
it really can make a huge difference in people's lives, and people are very receptive to helping because ADHD. We throw it around so much, we talk about it all the time. People are very open to helping you with it too.
Right.
If you say I need, 4 highlighters at my desk at all times when I hire on for this job, people are going to do that because it's what makes you productive. We don't see the same thing with depression. I need to not do this because at the end of the day, my heart's going to hurt so much. That's not an accommodation we really see. Same thing for anxiety. I need to not go speak to this client because it makes me anxious. Very real, equally real, but not as easy to work with in your day to day life. Um,
Right.
the availability of real tools is something that, we get really excited about. And I think with ADHD, we see a lot of these things and we see people being very creative in how they manage their own stuff in ways that no professional could ever come up with.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's very true. you know, I'm really happy about how, like with the analysis thing, it used to be, again, my paralysis, and being able to fix those problems, in how I've been able to go about my relationships with people, and people taking me seriously when I say, okay, I see this glitch in this system that nobody else sees it. I have to fight that battle all the time, and having had to prove myself and sticking to it, now it's like hey, it's great when people finally start listening to you. But nobody did, because I had a lot of derailing behaviors that you talked about before in the workplace. And being able to recognize that is just so key. It's just so key.
Well,
But
it's the hardest part to anything, I think. So is recognizing anything.
mhm,
Always the hardest part.
right, and it's taking everything that you learned and being able to apply it to yourself and seeing it from the outside in. When somebody were able to take that, just be able to take that out of body experience to recognize it. But that's the out of body experience is really in your accountability partner. You have to have those trusted systems of people that will call you out and say that, hey, this is what you're doing. Recognize it, turn it around, or fix it. Something.
We always say that it's usually other people that send people in for services. Eventually, it's the behaviors that other people notice that say, hey, you need to get that checked out. And it's never more true than with ADHD, I don't think, that it's people annoying others and then realizing that there might be something going on.
Right.
That was the
Well,
part I was
yeah.
thinking about just a minute ago. Is at what point do you go see a medical professional or go see your doctor and discuss it with them?
I would say anytime that anything is getting in the way of your everyday life, you need to talk to somebody about it.
Yeah,
To me, that's the definition of a persistent issue is if it's interfering with work, school, or play, talk to somebody about it.
yeah. I think if you find yourself getting frustrated or people around you seem to be getting frustrated, that's a good telltale sign that, you know, it's difficult sometimes for you to see your faults in any way, right? Because in your mind, that's, you're doing right by yourself. But my thing is, and I tell my son this all the time, not everyone else can always be wrong. Sometimes you gotta just listen to the people around you and take it for what it is. Take the criticism and use it.
A big part of it too is, it's about self discovery in certain ways. The way I use it with my son is when he has a behavior, especially if he made his mom angry. It's not more about telling him what it is. It's about leading him through the impacts of his behavior. So really, it was just about, um, you know, why did you say that? Well, I was angry. Okay, well, why were you angry? Well, because this happened. Well, why did that happen? And why did you say that to your mother? Well, I don't know. Well, I need you to think about how you need to know. And how did it make your mother feel? It made her feel very sad. Well, do you like your mom to feel sad? Well,
That's
so it
great
was
that you're
more of
making them aware. Yeah.
but it's that self discovery. So if he comes up with the answer himself, there's creative ways to lead him to the answer without giving it to him. That I've worked with him on. It's just about saying, okay, so do you like waiting to the last minute? Well, no, because what happens when you wait to the last minute? Well, I get upset. Yeah, and you start crying and you start throwing temper tantrums, and then you have to stay up late and you have to finish it anyway, right? So if you know this is going to happen, why do you do it? Why do you continue to do it? How many more times do you want to go through that? Right? So, it's about, again, it's about the forethought, trying to put that forethought to what his next reaction is going to be. So do you want to do it again? I mean, look, I get it. For ADHD, another behavior of that is that we're very good at manipulating the last minute to make it look like, because the pressure creates hyperfocus.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that. So I know as an adult, I have a hard time getting on him about the last minute because I still wait to the last minute, because I know it creates that pressure, and I could create a presentation that looks like I took months to do, but I could do it in a couple of hours because the hyper focus makes me do it instead of just piecemealing out. Some people could do it, like do a little bit a day, read a little bit here, read a little bit there. But sometimes that pressure works in my favor. I can't tell him that. I don't want to tell him. But again, it's just like one of those things that people with ADHD can do well, where other people might falter. Again, one of those superpowers to recognize how do you create scenarios with hyper focus. That's why Sentinel talked about a lot of these are the conversations you have with a lot of people that play video games. Because for me, video games are what quieted my mind. I think, Log just posted what were the things that you loved about Destiny? How did Destiny change your life? And for me, it was when I was going through the very hard time, with a family status change, and I moved to a whole new city expecting that the family was going to go there, and that didn't happen. What did I have? I always had video games, but again, that creates a hyper focus and it quiets your mind, because now I can think about that and not the negative things in my life. And I know very well that video games are very much a distraction for a lot of people, because you create worlds of fantasy and wonder, and it makes your mind go to great, wonderful places away from reality. So I know the video game world. I'm pretty sure is very high level ADHD in here. I mean, me as an example, because it does help me focus.
And the level of focus that you need is on that next superpower level to really power through a lot of those games. So it really does work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great outlet. I mean, it was always a positive outlet for me, and again, gaming led me to this, to meeting you, and in realizing that, there is a world out there that can meld the two worlds together and can bring awareness and talk about it, and that's why I've always, enjoyed what you guys do. And thank you for letting me be a part of it.
I mean, and not to mention, you and I are basically neighbors.
Right?
What?
Yeah, we're in the same county.
I was going to say, you guys carpool?
He's right down the street.
Pretty much. Do we carpool? Well, we got to work together, buddy. I don't think you know how carpooling works, Joe.
Yeah, when I found out it was Atlanta, I was like, oh, look at
that. That's great. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing, that part of you, and, sharing that experience and what great tips and everything that you've learned from it. And I can't even express how meaningful it was for you to come on and just share all that with us about your experiences with ADHD and how you have used it to just excel at things. You found your triggers, you help others, you're passionate about helping others, and you know what, I wish I could work with you. I do.
Well, you never know what the future holds. We can find a way where there's a will.
Maybe I
There's
can move to
relatives.
Atlanta.
Where are we going to get our chips?
Oh, well, there's Frito-Lay all over the world. I can transfer
Yeah.
anywhere. That's one of the great
Well, I
things
mean-
about the company that I work for is I can transfer literally anywhere in the world. I could go to England and be Bife's neighbor and sell Walker chips.
And then, and then there's a restraining order filed in your name.
That's after. There's other people to
Well, I
bother.
thank you. Well, I thank you for letting me come on and tell my story because, you know, it's my story. You know, or I'm sticking to it. But it's, you know, I never expected I would be able to do this. You know, be able to share my story. You know, and excited to be able to tell my family that this is that I had. Here's my ability to be able to, you know, share, you know, my life and my
Yeah.
struggles, you know, and you know, I'm happy to be a sounding board for anybody that just would have a question. I mean, I'm by no means a therapist, but you know, I'm a peer. I'm just a regular guy had gone through this, and you know, it's really it's a powerful thing that people have to deal with. I mean, you know, it's like all those voices in your head at one time. You know,
It's
how do you
it's
quiet?
such a strong moment of clarity as someone else who struggles with you know, mental health issues. It's such a wonderful moment of clarity when you get to a point like being fully comfortable with, you know, talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, and the crazy part is the flip side to all that is that sometimes there was comfort in the negative feelings that you have because, and I've had this conversation with so many people, like, why do people stay in destructive relationships? Why do people keep going back to the well? Why do people doing that? Because it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And the scary world is trying to find that moment of clarity and getting lost in that rather than knowing, I know what to expect. I know I'm going to feel this way. And there's a weird sense of comfort because I can feel, I still can remember what it feels like to be in the dark days when I felt like, you know, I had to, you know, sit in the dark and just try to decompress and whatever it was. But, you know, there's some times where they talk about the darkness still can draw you back in, and you can always feel that tug. And you know, there's always that sense of comfort, but how do you find that comfort in then finding that moment of clarity and then moving past it and beyond it? That's the hard part because, again, you know, being in a certain place and even if it's bad, you know, to realize there's a bigger world out there of knowledge and recovery. I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely does.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. You know, my experience going through life is always it's a little easier to hear information or something or criticism or anything from somebody you relate to, you know, so you're part of the community. So people are going to see this, they're going to relate to you in the way, you know, destiny, it can be anything. I think they absorb it a little bit better, and I think that to me is the greatest service we all do is sharing, and you know, comes from yourself, from your own story or your own experiences, that people know that it means a little bit extra. You know, I think they identify with it, and I think it resonates a little bit more. So I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I thought it was fantastic. So
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Really, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, what you guys do, and I really appreciate the fact of just letting me be a small part of that. And you know what? I always believe people come to your life like seasons, and you know, sometimes they'll stay, sometimes they go, but you know, sometimes those seasons really need to, you know, bear fruit, and and everything happens for a reason. We'll believe in that.
True.
And me happening upon you guys, it's been really helpful for me, and thanks for letting me be a part of that.
We're just lucky we got Bailey to keep us all in line. So
Yeah, I wasn't gonna say
we're
it.
all. You're
What I
wrong.
You just wait till we get off here.
The funny part is that Jones is who keeps Bailey in line.
Right.
Don't tell. Seriously, he
Jones
does
is
straighten up my world.
Bailey's main man.
Yes, 80 pounds of puppy. That's my boy.
Well, just so to touch back, the test that medical professor will run, there's no one test, but a gold standard that they do to evaluate people that may be affected by ADHD is neuropsychological evaluation, and it's the most comprehensive that they can do with somebody, and it essentially assess how an individual's brain functions and how it's used to identify brain-based disorders like ADHD. So if you feel like you're being if you feel any of these you're being triggered, or if you feel like you may have it, go see your medical professional or a medical professional and talk to them about it. Like Bailey and everybody said, definitely talk to somebody.
Yeah, and never be embarrassed. Never be embarrassed at who you are. I mean, because everybody has their superpower, and you just got to tap into it. And don't be embarrassed. I mean, again, ADHD it's a way of life. I mean, you can make it work for you. Mm-hmm. You really can. You really can.
That's great.
And it's a fact.
Yeah. Well, one thing with the testing, which just was our experience, because we did go to the next level test, but you have to ask, you have to kind of fight to get that because it's not readily available. Mm-hmm. Everyone tries to just do this Connors test, which is the one I was talking about, and they just say, "Oh well, you've already been tested." Well, no.
Is that the one? Really? Is that the one where you play with blocks?
They did that in order. So I wasn't there for it. Yeah, it's a basic run-of-the-mill type thing that I think like any guidance counselor can run. I'm not too sure.
What they do, they do kind of an inter-rater reliability thing. So they want to see that there's problems across every single part of a kid's life. So they have the parents fill one out, the teachers fill one out, they have a coach, they'll have them fill one out, so that they can really determine what's going on before a kid is triggered, what happens when he is, and then, what settings is that occurring in? Because it's only one or two, it's the setting, it's not the kid. You'll see it across your home environment. There will be just little things, even when he's not trying to learn. There will be things that you can see that kind of correspond with the difficulties they have at school. And so the value in that is seeing where the triggers lie and what commonalities there are. It does kind of come up short in that it doesn't involve the kid very much. It really just relies on the observation of other people to determine behaviorally what's going on rather than seeing necessarily psychologically what's going on.
Right.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, you have to really believe in the test, because when you're reading some of the questions, you're like, what do you mean? How does he react after I give him chocolate milk? Or it's like stupid questions. Like some of them are like out there, but so if you don't believe in it, you're not going to really take the time to focus on the question and answer it honestly, which is going to work against you. And like you said, it falls short. Yes, I think it gives them a broad spectrum, but it gives them a broad spectrum of things that could be much, much bigger. So if that Connors, if anybody's listening and they have a child that, they take the Connors test and they say ADHD, the first thing you do is make an appointment and get the next level test, because then you can dive into it deeper. and maybe avoid that misdiagnose, or give them the best chance to really get it done right, because that opened up a whole nother world for us. So,
And I want to kind of say something about medication before we leave, because there's big proponents in both camps that, never medicate a kid, or every kid should be medicated. And neither one of those are true. I think that it's a very individualized choice, and any shame or stigma we have against people taking medications that they need to be their best selves, it needs to go away. And I think that parents especially feel this shame more deeply. I rarely have an adult come to me in conflict about taking ADHD medication, but I'll have parents come to me about medicating their kids, and I get it. But I think, like you said, Sean, sometimes you need just a little bit of help to get to do the things make you better. You need that little edge. And I often say that about antidepressants too. Sometimes they just get people on the couch. That's what you needed to be able to go to therapy. If a medication is something that you need to be able to keep things in line, then there's no shame in that game. You need to take care of yourself. Just kind of want to open up some freedom around that, because it's one of the things that when we talk about ADHD, we talk about the most often.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're on the meds, you can learn those tools and those triggers much easily, because you're more focused. You can retain that information. You can get what you need out of that training, and then you can systematically try to come off the medicine. You can try to reduce it, but you got to get there first. And I think that's true with anything we go through, But you got to get the information first, and you got to get that feeling inside you that you got it. You've won.
Right. And when if you decide to go and talk to a medical professional about it, which you should, do your research on who you are going to take an appointment with. And there are a lot of free resources and databases to give you their full background, not only what they specialize in, but there are laws on the books that basically everything that they do in their medical profession has to be open book now. At least in the United States. And if you don't know how to do that, email the project and I will tell you how. So please do your research when you're talking to a medical professional.
Right.
Yes, and remember, you're the boss of that situation. You're hiring them. They work for you.
Yeah. So you said you went through multiple doctors, right? I mean, we use more than one, so we're getting multiple opinions. I think that's always the most important thing too. Is get information from everywhere, and then make your own decision. So,
and you find that one that listens to you. I mean, that doesn't preach to you, or doesn't. It's one that truly asks questions and really the one that cares. And if you have to narrow it down to the one, that's the one.
Right.
That'll listen to you, because a lot of cases it's just people are just throwing darts.
Yep.
And especially when the kids are younger. I mean, it's throwing darts until they can speak for themselves and say, "This is how I'm feeling, the way it makes me feel." And you mentioned before about being in tune about what's going on with your kids, because I know for me, when my son was going through school and when he had to take medication, and it was at certain times of the day and they split it up, well, things were a lot different, because I know that lunchtime happens, and when you eat, then all of a sudden that messes with your blood sugar, and that can affect his productivity. So we had to be in tune with what were his behaviors versus when he took the medication versus when he had lunch, because when he moved up a grade, his lunch went back an hour. So when we started realizing why wasn't the medication seeming to be working, then it was like another one of those light bulbs. But it's about being in tune with what's going on and just saying it's not the medication that's working. It's his structure. It's what's happening. If he took it before lunch, then it kicks in by the time it's over. If he takes it after lunch, well, by that time it's already run its course, and by the time he takes it and it kicks in, it was way too late. So you have to be that in tune with what's happening with your kid, and it's not just related to the medication; it's to the behaviors that happen, and try to figure a pattern. When things happen at what time of the day, and
absolutely.
sleep schedule, structure, things of that nature, all play into that, and you just have to be that in tune, and that's paying attention to your kid and asking questions.
Yeah, we're actually looking at doing the same thing. So he just recently we took him off all meds for a couple months to get back to a baseline to build ourselves back up. So now he's just started taking something again, but now he's finding himself a little bit more tired during the day. So now we're going to look at taking the medicine at night. Take it before you go to bed, so that you sleep through that tired period, and then when you wake up, you're on
That's
the
interesting.
tail end of it, and kind of using that built up energy later on. So, it could be a difference between morning and night. Make a difference.
There's so many different parameters around it. I mean, everything from body weight, and and I mean, sometimes even, when they think you need to take more of it, sometimes you may need to take less of it. And that was the same thing with me. If I took more of it, didn't mean I focused more; it just meant the side effects were worse. But when I figured out myself, I realized at what time of the day I need to take it. But everybody's structure is different because I work retail. So that means, my focus has to be at different times of the day. Well, if I figured out what time I can take it here, then the second time at another point of the day, where does it work for me at all points of the day? So I'm not either staying way up or way down. And that's the same thing with a kid. It's absolutely trying to understand. Just like you said, taking it at night. I would have never thought of that, but it makes all the sense in the world. Where you talk about you use that tiredness in the way it's supposed to be. And it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of analysis, and really, and it is a full-time job to just monitor these things, to understand at what point does the medication change, because just recently went through that with my son. He was on a particular medication. All of a sudden, he started getting headaches. He started getting all that. Well, why was that? Because basically the dosage didn't work for him anymore. So it was just basically like taking just basically taking a water pill or whatever it would be. And the side effects were happening regardless. So the dose had to go up a little bit, and then all of a sudden it was like it clicked again. But it was just noticing that what patterns of behavior happen, or what patterns in your child's psyche, in headaches, whatever it may be. That's got to happen. Got to be that in tune in order to be successful with it, because it's an ever-changing world.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add, and you've talked about it, but I don't think any of us have directly said it, is communication. Just absolutely talk about anything and everything, and any type of question, any type of information you can get is useful. So little things matter, and like you're saying, if you're in tune to those little things, you can pick up a lot of information without within a simple conversation. So don't be afraid to communicate, and that would be the only last thing I would add. So,
and when you get to have those kind of conversations, that's something beyond video games or anything like that, and you get to really get into your kid's brain, it is the greatest feeling in the world to have a conversation with your kid, and and they're talking about their feelings. That was the greatest thing in the world for me, when my son would start open up a little bit about that. And, it was,
it's definitely it's bonding. It can hurt sometimes. You can't be afraid of. Sometimes Dude, I cry watching Twitch commercials, all right? It just so you know, you can't be afraid to have those hard conversations, and you can't be afraid to put yourself out there too. I think it's important that our children see us vulnerable. You know, you can't always be the Man of Steel, or you know, Wonder Woman, or you know, whatever. I think they need to see you're in the trenches with them, and the biggest way I think they can identify that is by seeing you vulnerable, and you know, not afraid to show your own emotions. Otherwise, how are they supposed to show theirs? So, you know.
Oh, it's funny you bring that up, because every time, like, if the you know, well, there's daggum Publix Christmas commercials. I get you every time, but you know, but my son will look over and he'll go, "Are you crying? Are you crying? No, maybe."
Come on, I cry at Toy Story, for crying out loud.
Oh yeah. Don't even get
yeah.
started.
Let's not even bring that up. No, Mufasa, don't even. I can't handle it.
Well,
I could do it.
I think that's a great spot right there to end the stream right here. Thank you again, Boop, Sean, for coming on and talking with us and sharing with us. And Bailey, thank you so much for coming on, being with us. I love how you keep us together.
Bailey's so cool.
She's-
When I grow up, I want to be just like her.
Yeah.
This is why I show up, guys. This part right here.
We love it.
Tell me how pretty I am while you're at it.
That's right.
Oh, thank you again. I really appreciate it. It's been enlightening. It's been educational. It's been enlightening. It's been
Absolutely.
Been fantastic.
Yeah, if anybody has any more questions or anything, feel free to reach out to us at the project, and never keep quiet. You know, talk to your doctor, talk to your family, friends, people in your support network, and that's it. That's all I got.
You know, and I offer myself as a resource if you.
And
you know,
also, if you have
wanna
any
talk somebody
questions,
through it,
reach out to Sean.
please.
You can find him
please,
on Twitter, Discord, and every other social as Mr. Boop Cannon.
Yes.
Yes. Have a good night.